Let's not meet again, Montana hunters. So, my wife and I backpack and hike a lot. This is the story of that. The more remote the place, the better. In 2015, my wife and I were in the Bitterroot Wilderness in Montana. We've been out for 2 weeks on a 100-mile route, finding trail we kind of connected together on a few topo maps to make a loop. We had only seen one other person, Tom. We met him on our second day in, and his last day out. He told us he hadn't seen or ran into anyone out there, so as far as we all knew, we were going to be alone out there. He told us hunting season was weeks away, but there might be scouts out, to be very careful with our food, where we eat and our scent because it's bear country, and we had seen a few and even one with cubs. He also mentioned that he had heard cougars in the distance, but we should be okay as long as we stick together. We camped together that night, and the next morning, we thanked him for his company, all the information, and parted ways. For 2 weeks, we hiked, saw some cool vistas, swam, saw and heard wildlife, and all the stuff you'd expect to see in the backcountry. We didn't really think about Tom again after a few days out, and hadn't seen anyone. We took the thought of being alone for granted, and let our guard down. As far as other people were concerned, we were all alone out there. We are in our last few days out, winding the trip down, sauntering back to the trailhead, just taking it all in. We find a nice flat tent site, make a fire, some dinner, hang our food bag, and walk back to our tent for the night, and pass a good night's sleep. The next morning, as backpackers do, we break camp as early as possible, get some breakfast and coffee into us, and before we leave camp, I need a drop of deuce. So I venture away from the tent site to find a suitable spot. As I'm walking around to find a place to dig my cat hole, I come up on a lumped up thing looking like a bush. I was not expecting to run into anyone out there, as we had only seen one other person early on, and no one else since. I wasn't paying attention, as I'm looking for somewhere to shit and not looking out for people. These two are in a camo blind type of wrap. I didn't realize that they were there, and they didn't hear or realize that I walked up on them to the last goddamn minutes when I was right on top of them, tripping over one of their legs. They scared the shit out of me, and I scared the shit out of them. When I hit the guy's leg, I startled him. He kind of jumped up, knocking their blind off for the big reveal. The guy was on his knees, has a dick in hand, apparently blowing the other guy that is up against the tree. Now, the guy is on his knees and is looking at me dead in the eyes with a look of, what the fuck, who are you? Ah, fuck, I'm cut. My sight is going back and forth from Hunter, Dick, Dick, Hunter. The guy standing yells at me, what the fuck are you doing, man? They scramble, one trying to stand up, the other pulling his pants up. All the while, both are fighting the fucking blind that's wrapped in between them. Me in disbelief of what I just came upon, just stood there for what felt like fucking forever. I stumbled over my words to find an apology and blurt out, nothing guys, sorry man, have fun, and turned back to my camp in almost a run. They yelled out to me to stop, but I didn't. Fucking longest 200-yard sprint ever. Got back to camp. My wife looked at me and instantly knew something had happened and asked what was up. I told her to grab her stuff and we hurried out of there without a word. About half an hour to an hour later of sprint hiking, we had to stop. I still hadn't took a dump and I had to go. So we took a spur trail to break, snag and tell her what happened. She told me she was worried and that I scared her. She was scared the whole time thinking I'd been chased by a bear or cougar or something and it was after us. I told her nothing like that it was just two hunters hiding out blowing each other. We talked a bit about it. She asked if I thought they'd look for us. I told her I didn't think so, that they probably left after being caught. If they were upset? Yeah, they yelled at me. Wanted to know what the fuck I was doing. If we should just make it back to our car and leave? No, let's just wait them out just in case they are at the trailhead waiting for us. Like I said, we've been out for about 2 weeks now, and we have been making our way back, and are less than a day hike from the trailhead at this point, so they must have gone out after being caught, right? After a while of talking it over, we kind of just chuckled it off and hiked on to the creek where we were going to camp for the night. We made camp off trail in a nice outcrop with no incident. Next morning, we wake up, break camp, do our morning routine, and hike out to the trailhead. With that, we're not really thinking of the two hunters anymore. As we get to the trailhead, we meet two ladies that have been prepped breakfast and now cleaned up. As you're walking to the parking lot, they chat us up with the usual backcountry questions. How long we have been out, how many miles did we do, did we see any bears, what did we eat? Then almost at the same time, one lady offered up some of her leftover food, as the other gal starts yelling, "Hey hubby, these two have been hiking up on the same trail, and so were just out on yesterday, but they were out for 2 weeks. Bring them some of that real food and juice." Hubby pokes his head out to their camper and says hi. Lo and behold, it's the fucking camper that was against the tree. His smile quickly faded as his face turned white, then to an angry look when he realized who he's looking at. Then his buddy, the giver, turns a damn corner from their trailer to see me standing there. I feel the blood just drain from my body, and this guy's face turns from happy-go-lucky to disbelief and fear at the sight of me. The wife then asks if we happened on their husband out there, as they were scouting for game yesterday. As I'm stumbling over my words, they are darting their looks from me to themselves. Before I can say anything, my wife is answering, "Yes, we love some real food. No, we hadn't seen anyone. You guys are the first in 2 weeks." The wife turns to Hunter and says, "You guys must have a really good hiding spot." Cheese and fucking rice. I think both the Hunters and me had a mini heart attack. One of the guys just gives a nod. My wife and I graciously take their pancakes and fucking sausage of all the damn things. I can see both Hunters quietly talking to each other, staring over at me every once in a while. I'm doing my best to avoid the situation by packing up the car. While my wife is thanking the Hunter's wife for the food, both fucking Hunters come up to me with a beer. The one that was on the tree kinda pushed it into my chest and asked if I'd seen anything out there. My heart frickin' stopped. I again stumbled over my words. Other than some wild animals, nothing worth writing home about. Yeah, we didn't see much either. But we are really surprised you didn't hear us last night. Walk through your camp, be careful. You never know what can happen out there in the middle of the woods. After a few seconds, the one just smirks, and they turn to leave with, "Have a safe trip home." I wasn't sure what was going to happen in that moment, so I was psyching myself for a fight. I was kind of shooken up. As we were leaving the trailhead, my wife asked if I was okay, and if those were the guys I'd seen. My reply was, "Yeah, what do you think, babe?" And then asked what they said to me. I told her I thought I was going to have to fight them, but that they just gave me a beer to buy my silence. I didn't mention the passive-aggressive threat they made about walking through her tent, though. Learn from horror movies. Do not make out in the woods. So, this actually happened when I was 18 at my last year in high school. My school was located in a boring residential area. It is actually a pretty wealthy neighborhood, and this is important to the following events. Me and my friends usually would go to a store and buy cheap alcohol in order to get wasted while walking down the streets. Not proud of those days. But if you had the energy sometimes, we'd go to this park of sorts and get some privacy. We were always worried of getting caught by the school and having our parents called, you know? This said park has basically 3 layers. It had a lake at the center, in the middle a running field, and woods enveloping it all. We would obviously get in between the trees and get our teenager asses drunk. We were out of the school's reach, and we didn't have to worry about shit, except some occasional park staff and some weirdos lurking by. But we were never in less than 5, so no problem. Surprisingly, this is not a drunk regret story, though I have many. I just wanted to get it clear that I didn't have much places to do private shit at the time. My options were very limited. This became a problem when I got my first girlfriend. It was already pretty damn awkward just existing in front of each other. Even worse, engaging all the processes of making out, especially inside the school buildings, where anyone could simply catch us in the act. So a simple, "Hey, let's have a date at the park today," was the perfect solution. Immediately upon our arrival, we started to search for obscure places. As we found out, we got to our business. It was going quite well, even though we had occasionally stopped due to people getting close while walking past. In one of those situations, we heard some footsteps and immediately stopped. After they ceased, we got back to kissing, but then I decided to open my eyes and look around a bit. Yeah, I'm one of those. Only to see a weirdo statically looking at us from about 50 meters away. I suddenly stopped and stared back at the guy, hoping he would go away, but he didn't. Instead, he waves and starts walking towards us. As he does it, my mind is flooded with the until now forgotten memories of people saying how shady that place was, stuff like huge drug deals, stalkers, and people up to no good. After the awkward walk in our direction, the guy starts talking to us. He looked like he was in his mid-40s. He was bald and wearing a regular outfit. He looked like the everyday man you see in the street, but can't remember the face. Jen and I were clearly nervous. The man pulled something like, "So, hey there, having a good time, huh? I myself used to get here with some cuties back in the day." Then he proceeded to ask information, like where we live, what we study. I lied saying we're from the neighborhood, but told the truth about our school. He continued, "Really sorry to interrupt your fun, but I just couldn't go on without telling you that the park patrol usually passes by here this time, and if they catch ya, they'll be probably calling your school." Fishy, no doubt. But then he made a suggestion. I know a quiet place around here, used it myself. Come on, I'll show ya." And then started walking, signaling for us to follow. Yeah, I know you probably would have the balls to stand up and go away, but for us it was so sudden and fast that we didn't know actually what was happening, so we followed the creep. The realization we fucked up came in the middle of the walk to the place, though. We were silently panicking. After non-literal centuries of walking, we finally arrived at the place. It was a giant concrete pipe in an isolated playground, apparently used like a tunnel by the kids. The guy said more bullshit about his glorious days and finally left. I remember starting thinking that this guy was extremely weird, but with actual good intentions since he actually left. I was not putting our lives at stake, though. As the man figure disappeared, I told Jen we had to go. She quietly agreed. Before leaving, I had this feeling that the creep might still be around, so we hid in a bush and waited. Boy, was I right. Almost instantly after we hid, the guy creeped out of a tree and stealthily approached the playground. We freaked out. We were in that classic scene covering our mouths and looking through the bushes. We thought he saw us since he was approaching us, but he didn't. As he arrives, the playground, he starts peeping at the BSP, big sex pipe. When he finds no one there, he leaves again. This was the moment when everything made sense. He lured us to this isolated place to get us in the act. But why, though? Why would he just do that if we were there? We were not staying there to find out, so we rushed to go away. At the beginning, we were just fast walking, but then the guy spawned out of nowhere in front of us and asked why we were leaving. I didn't even let the guy finish his sentence and said, "We gotta leave." Then we started running till we were far enough. It was a very weird experience till this day. I don't know what the intentions of the creep was. I got back to the park sometimes for various reasons. It is a popular place to hang out, and never saw the guy again. But I never saw this patrol he alerted us about either, so I assumed he really was up to no good. Lesson learned. No matter how much my hormones burn now, I'm only doing this shit at home. A school wilderness trip with a sadist. By the way, this is my first post here, so apologies in advance for anything I may have missed in the rules and guidelines. Giant block of text ahead. This happened to me some time ago, back when I was 10 on a school field trip to a ground of cabins some 70 kilometers or so from the city I lived in. The point of the trip was basically just to have fun. We weren't being taught much other than how to make shelters and light a fire in the rain. For the most part, we were supposed to spend the majority of the time just fooling around, playing tag and swimming in the nearby lake, and maybe playing board games inside the cabins when it was pouring outside. Things turned out to be less fun after the first 2 days. At first, the trip seemed great. We got to choose our own roommates. There were 4 rooms in each of the 4 cabins, and my group of friends and I obviously chose one together. There were 4 of us in total. Myself, an Indian guy, a Canadian, this happened in Canada, and a Chinese guy. Neither of us had ever been on a trip like this before, so far from home, and in the middle of a mountainous forest. When we got there, we took a tour, which was led by the camp's coordinator, this 20-something-year-old with shoulder-length blonde hair. He showed us the cabins, the lake, the trails, and the kitchens and lunchrooms, and then stressed to us that it was important that we not wander far from the cabins, since, being in a forest at the base of a mountain, the chances of getting lost were relatively high. So we finished the tour, ate dinner, then were guided to bed. As we had arrived somewhat late, My friends and I were extremely excited, what with this being our first time sleeping away from home and everything. The Canadian friend had the, at the time, seemingly brilliant idea to share ghost stories while we got ready for bed. We came up with a fictional character that would creep out kids or murder people or something. I came up with this idea of someone called Psycho who would hide behind the shower curtains and then stab you when you stepped inside. For the record, no one showered during the 4 days we were there. The Indian guy came up with a typical under-the-bed monster who would grab your legs as you got close to the bed frame and drag you under it. As the hour passed, the lights out drew closer. We started to get the creeps. By the time lights out hit, 2 hours later, we were so high-strung with a combination of excitement and nerves that everyone, including me, decided to share one bed, even though there were 2 of them. The Indian guy's story about grabbing your ankles and being dragged under the bed monster unnerved us to the point that we jumped onto the beds from nearby pieces of furniture rather than having to walk near the bottoms of it. As I mentioned previously, I decided to sleep on my own because 3 people in one bed, even 10-year-olds, was awkward in this being summertime. It was hot. We talked for a bit before turning off the lights and finally falling asleep, but I was woken up some hours later by what sounded like whispering. I didn't move at first, since the stories we had shared while getting ready for bed were still in my mind, and then I recognized the voices, and realized my friends were the ones whispering from over on the other side of the room in their bed. So I relaxed for a moment, and I was about to call out and ask what they were discussing when the Indian guy, apparently unaware that I had woken up, hissed, "What's it doing?" Immediately, the thought of some monster looming over my bed took my mind, and I froze, eyes darting around in the darkness. I didn't see anything, as the room was empty and it was too dark to make out the distinctive forms of my friends in the other bed. It's looking at him," said the Chinese guy, and then added, "Do you think he'll break the window?" And then I looked at the window. It was one of those floor-to-ceiling ones, with a latch that opened up to a balcony. Standing in the balcony, pressed up against the window, was the silhouette of a person. The curtains were drawn, but they were white and thin, and we could still see the warped shadow of the person, illuminated from behind by the dim light of the moon. The man, it was almost certainly a man, was holding a long pole with a wide end, similar to a sledgehammer or even an axe. I whispered, "Guys." The man outside didn't move, but the Chinese guy did. I don't know how he even worked up the courage to do this, but he crawled out of bed and slowly worked his way to the side of the window, ducked low, all commando style. He reached forwards, grabbing the curtains, and was about to peek between the fabric when the man outside knocked on the glass. The poor Chinese guy jumped so badly that he pulled hard on the curtain, causing the entire thing to rip off the railing, letting us see the person outside. He was dressed in black, aside from a pair of orange shorts, and had a ski mask on. What he held in his hands was actually a shovel, rather than a hammer or axe. Nevertheless, the 4 of us were terrified. The Chinese guy screamed and bolted for the door, and in less than a second, the 4 of us were scrambling out of bed and hightailing for the exit, screaming all the while. The Indian guy tripped along the way, and the Chinese guy was in such a rush that he slammed into the door, causing the lock to nearly snap. In seconds, we were in the cabin's lobby, and everyone else was rushing out of their rooms to see what had happened, teacher included. We told the teacher in terrified gasp what had happened, and she went to investigate, but found nothing. The person had disappeared. After that, it took about an hour before we were convinced to even step back into our rooms. I clambered into bed with my friends, despite their protest, and we stayed awake for the remaining 4 hours or so, hands clutched around our flashlights. The curtains remained opened. The next day passed normally, and though we talked about the event, we soon forgot ourselves in the blur of activities that the camp counselors set for us. We ate lunch, fooled around, ate dinner, and then with no small amount of dread, walked back to the cabins and got ready for bed. The same guy came back, but to a different cabin this time. When we woke up and headed for the breakfast hall, a group of girls were all talking about the man with the shovel, and after talking with them for a bit, we realized that they had experienced the same thing as us. We were just about to go to the teacher and explain that there was someone out there trying to murder us, little kids, when the camp's coordinator, the 20-something with the blonde hair, walked into the breakfast hall wearing the exact same orange shorts the man outside on our balcony had been wearing. He denied everything when our group questioned him, and we didn't dare take the matter to the other camp counselors or even our teachers. The rest of the trip was uneventful, but judging by the shorts, it was almost definitely him. At the time, it freaked me out to think that one of the camp counselors was doing that sort of thing. We suspected him for murder and a whole host of other things. But looking back at the trip, he was probably just like a bored young adult trying to make an otherwise repetitive job as a counselor more exciting. Still, I hate to think about how depraved he must have been to scare 10-year-olds in that way, possibly leaving them with trauma or emotional scarring. We avoided him like the plague for the duration of the trip. They had a chainsaw. Early one Friday afternoon, in my sophomore year of college, my girlfriend Madeline's roommate Amy had the idea to gather all of her new friends for a camping excursion near her hometown in upstate Vermont. She said she knew the area and had a couple of friends who lived close to the site. She said they were cool and would be fine with us staying there, like it was their property or something. Nobody really knew Amy too well, but it sounded like a fun expedition. Around 20 people agreed to go. The location was about an hour from college campus, and none of us were familiar with the area. Some volunteered to drive, as long as passengers contributed for gas or cigarettes or hooked them up with booze. People thought of this as an inexpensive opportunity to get away from campus with friends, and of course there were girls with alcohol. Of the 20 people who went, 7 were girls. 3 cars and 1 soccer mom van held all of us, and it was a tight squeeze. En route to our destination, Amy asked us if it was alright if we buy her friends some beer, because the area we were going to wasn't close to a place that sells it. So, booze was purchased, the Natty Ice, Pabst, Coors kinds. As we got off the highway, it took us about 30 minutes to get to our site. Only Amy knew how to get there, as the others followed shortly behind. We passed nothing but trees, with few houses around and no signs of human life anywhere. We traveled on backcountry dirt roads, with out-of-state license plates and 2 Vermont resident drivers. After finally reaching the campground, we noticed that there was only one way in and out. We also had no cell phone service, although not that unusual in the northeast kingdom of VC at the time. As we settled in, Amy met a car to hand-deliver beer for her friends, and they took off. She walked back to the site with us and started setting up tents, built a campfire, and get our drink on. It's about 5 p.m. or so, and slowly getting darker. Our site was about a half-mile away from where we entered. A scenic pond was behind our campfire, and Amy said that the other side of it was Canada. We all started drinking and relaxing, enjoying ourselves. About an hour into partying, we noticed 2 random guys. They looked either college-aged or mid-20s, walk towards our campsite. We assumed they were Amy's friends, as she gave them a beer. They continued to lurk at the edges of the site, but didn't talk to anyone, just stared. It made some people a little uncomfortable, and afterwards, there was some talk about them. They left a few minutes after finishing their beer and walked away from the site. We continued to party, although I felt a little on edge after those dudes seemed to stake us out. After another hour or so, the rumbling of big engines, gunshots, horns blaring, and howling screams stopped us cold. Coming down the only road to the site were the lights and silhouettes of several trucks. The trucks were speeding, with loud dual mufflers, large wheels, and headlights with fog lights and more lights above their windshield, the kind made for big rigs. The trucks pull up and block the only way out. 4 trucks in total. We're 2 deep on the road, with their brights illuminating our party. One by one, the guys get out of their seats, either from the bed of the truck or inside. It looked like about 15 of them all together. As they approached us, our party went silent, and all you could hear was the crackling of the fire and the music playing from our van stereo. The leader had a cigarette in his mouth, a beer in one hand, and a shotgun in the other. He stood about 20 feet in front of my African-American friend Jack, stared at him and said, "This is our home turf. You know what we do here in Vermont. We kill fucking niggers! The shotgun he had wasn't fully erected until he loaded it, cocked it, and shot it off his thigh with one hand. As the bullet buzzed a couple of feet above Jack's head, the whole group turned around, ran back to their trucks. While we sat frozen, they peeled out, reversing one out at a time, still continuing to howl, shooting off more bullets, driving erratically and trashing the road with beer cans and tire marks. After they all left, people started packing and quickly getting ready to leave. Amy apparently didn't know who some of them were and insisted our group stay, saying they wouldn't come back. Normal people would leave after an episode like this, but Madeline wanted to stay, and it would be messed up if I didn't. Madeline was a Vermont Beauty Queen contestant, and I was trying to impress her, so I agreed to stay. The cars that left were packed. A Toyota Camry, which normally sits 3 in the back and 2 in the front, fit 4 sitting in the back and included Jack, who was lying horizontally with his feet out the window. Also, 2 were in the passenger seat, and managed to get a seatbelt on. My brother Evan was there, and he begged me to get in the car, but I didn't listen, and they took off. There were 8 of us left, 3 women, 5 men, with 1 car and a van. I knew it wasn't a good situation, and when my own brother left, leaving me there in the woods with the others, I felt uneasy. I sobered up fast and decided not to drink anymore. I wish the others did the same, but they kept on partying. They took out the hard liquor. As the others got deeper into the sauce, I stayed wary. I was the only sober person at this point. About 45 minutes after the initial incident, the sound of trucks again rumbled through the woods. This time, the truck stopped further down the road from us and shut off their lights. We heard the unmistakable sound buzz of a chainsaw and realized they had started to cut down trees. The trees fell in front of their trucks, blocking our exit. Not only did we have fewer friends on site, but by then they were even more intoxicated than before. We were outnumbered. After hearing the chainsaw and the crash of the trees, we all knew we were in trouble, regardless how high our BAC may have been. White underpants became brown, and some started panicking. My girlfriend's brother Bruce started sucking down straight liquor without a chaser and built up some liquid courage. He walked over towards the trucks. We didn't know what he was going to do. He had a big mouth and no filter, so I assumed it wouldn't end well. We heard some commotion from the truck's direction and a lot of cursing. My girlfriend yelled at me to help her brother. I am 6'2" and athletic, but not one to pick fights. As I reluctantly walked towards the scene, I saw the tree-cutting Onceler and his crew. I also saw Madeline's brother getting his ass beat, punch after punch in the face, by at least 2 different losers, and a clan watching with alcohol in their hands. Meanwhile, in the background, the chainsaw continued revving. As I slowly approached the group, I could see there were at least 15 maniacs drinking, getting an innocent guy get beat up in a one-sided show. My instincts came into play, and I pushed the guys who were punching him and gave the swift left hook straight into one of their heads. The other pushed me back, and I tripped over one of the trees they knocked down. The guy I punched went down, and I assumed he was unconscious because he didn't get up quickly. At this point, everything was in slow motion. I grabbed Bruce and helped him as we ran back to our cars. He was still disoriented from a couple of blows to the head and face. I yelled to all my friends to get in the car and van. Meanwhile, in the back of my head, I knew these guys were going to find me and rip me to shreds. At this point, I picked the closest automobile that was open and driver ready. It was the van, and unfortunately, Madeline wasn't in it. Everyone jumped in the nearest car, rolled the windows up, locked the doors, and started the engines. I knew we weren't going to be able to get the cars out of the location with the trees in the way of our path. Both cars drove towards the end of the road and stopped right in front of the trees where the crew was waiting. 2 girls and 3 guys were in the van, and 2 guys and Madeline in the other car. The drunken clan started throwing sticks, rocks, beer cans, and pound on the glass windows with their hands, shouting and threatening that they were going to hurt us. Most people in the van were screaming, including my male roommate. They surrounded each car, and the shaking begins. The van was swaying back and forth as we hear them laughing in the background. The owner of the car starts revving his engine, but they continue to push the car on both sides. At one point, the van was on 2 wheels, almost tipping over to the right. After that, they fled off to their trucks, driving away screeching like wild animals, continuing to shoot off their guns. This gave us an opportunity to get out of the car and attempt to move the trees so we can get the fuck out of there. At least 2 trees were down. and the girth of them was so big. It took some work, but we were able to move them slightly to the right, enough to maybe get around them. We were too excited to lift any further. We got the front two wheels around the trees and accelerated enough to hop over one of the trees that was in the way. The car bottomed out, but it worked. Same thing with the van, but it was higher off the ground. I quickly jumped into the small car with Madeline, another friend, and Bruce. The other three were in the van. We all wanted to quickly get out of there before the crew came back. Bruce was driving and wanted nobody else to drive his car, and he swore he was fine to drive. We go left, and I noticed the van went right. We were yelling at Bruce to follow the van, but he just wanted to get out, and definitely was intoxicated and disoriented. He had a fast car and was picking up speed. After not even 5 minutes on the road, we passed a side street that intersected the road we were on, and a truck with headlights pulls up behind us. They put on their brights, including the extra fog lights, and start driving erratically. They speed up when we speed up with excessive honking. They try to get really close to the car as Bruce is swerving. You can hear another gunshot go off from either the passenger seat or backseat window. The truck driver picks up speed and comes to the left side of us, risking their lives and possibly oncoming traffic. Bruce gains control for a little bit, but eventually didn't time a left turn coming up, and we go off the right side of the road and into a small ditch. The car shuts off, and we can't start it. At this point, I'm scared for everybody's life, including my own. The truck slowly rolls behind our car and everything is quiet. I'm thinking they were going to rape Madeline and kill me. My friend who was in the back seat was a cancer survivor and was prepping and motivating himself to fight for his life. Our hearts are racing maximum beats per minute and feel like they are going to come out of our throats. Then, by some miracle, a random passerby in an automobile at midnight or so sees the truck with their obnoxious lights and us in a ditch, pulls over by us, and as if we are alright, we yell frantically, "No! Call 911 immediately! The truck behind us is trying to hurt us!" The truck and all passengers get into their vehicle and peel out. The Good Samaritan wait for us until the authorities arrived. He was truly our guardian angel. We see a local police car arrive. As we flag him down, he acted tough and told us all to shut up and stay in the car. He cursed at us, which I thought was unprofessional, and interrogated us one by one. He was an aggressive, mean, rough around the edges guy and had no sympathy. He claimed that we were lying and didn't want to even hear what we had to say. He made us feel really uncomfortable when we were supposed to feel safe. We were respectable towards him, listened to his directions, and all our stories were the same and accurate. About 10 minutes later, a state trooper in Canadian Border Patrol's car pulled behind him. The local cop and state trooper instantly get into a heated argument, like they were about to duke it out. They were fighting over whose jurisdiction the area was. It seemed so immature and ridiculous, the way they were handling this. We were the victims here, and it felt about as far from reassuring as possible. All authorities asked us to take them to the campsite and show them where everything took place. Bruce tried the car again to see if it would start, and it did. We were able to push it out of the ditch. Upon approaching the site road, the cops saw the trees down and had to park in front of them and walk to the campsite. We looked out where we had the fire and set up our tents, and they were missing. As we were looking around to see where our possessions were, they were floating deep in the pond. At this point, Canadian Border left, as it wasn't their country. Both state and local cops took statements and followed us to the main highway. I was surprised that not more police were involved in this. We eventually met up with the van passengers at a gas station to talk about what happened. One of the girls in the van was hysterical and couldn't even compose herself. While we were talking, we looked behind us, and she is beelining it to the main highway. The driver ran as fast as he could towards her and grabbed her before she ran into 75 miles per hour oncoming cars. We all decided to head back to the campus and agreed that if we needed anything to reach out to any of us for support. My buddy, the cancer survivor, was petrified, and even though he had a single dorm room to himself, he wanted to stay in my dorm room. He slept on the floor and claimed the concrete for several weeks. The next day or so, Our college organized a meeting for those who were involved to have a session to vent or talk about the episode. Counselors, security, and retired police attended, and they were there for the support. In the end, we think that the local cop was corrupt and was somehow related to the drunk crew, although it was a traumatic experience for all of us. Because there were no injuries or significant property damage, the cops did nothing. Amy denied setting us up, but the friendship was over at that point, and we never talked to her again. Two men in the woods. When I was around 9 years old, I'm a girl, I had two of my friends over to play and hang out. I lived in a small neighborhood in a small town, but our neighborhood was full of either elderly couples or young couples with new families and kids to play with. The girls I were hanging out with that day lived in my neighborhood as well, and were the same age as me. My neighborhood was looped in a circle with a cul-de-sac at one end of a little street connected to the circle. My friends and I would always walk down to the cul-de-sac because there was a little trail that went into the woods with a cute rustic wooden bridge over a small stream. We'd also discovered our way from the woods into a whole different cul-de-sac of a neighboring nearby neighborhood, so we liked to walk through to the other side. Recently, they'd started construction in the woods. There were a couple of new clearings full of dirt piles to make way for some new houses in the woods. That day it was super muddy. It rained the night before, and we all wore rubber rain boots. We started off down the path, stopping at the bridge. I just got a new digital camera, and we were taking our 2007 version of a selfie together on the bridge. We all thought this was super fun, cause especially at this age, none of us really had our own cameras or phones, although I had a flip phone in case of emergency that my mom had insisted I bring with me on her walk. After our group's pictures and blurry pictures of the forest, we kept going down the paths. There weren't really many paths so much as deer trails that we'd memorized from being through those woods so many times. Eventually we came to a clearing where they just cleared out to prepare for construction, and we were all climbing the giant piles of dirt and sand, outstretching our arms at the top, pretending we were the kings of the world as we looked around at the view from above. I snapped a few pictures of the woods from my vantage point, and we laughed as the dirt beneath one of my friend's feet gave way, and she slid down the dirt hill on her butt, and we joked that it looked like she had an accident. We were just easygoing, innocent kids that had fun over the little things is what I'm getting at. Eventually, we decided to venture back home, and that we were walking down one of the little trails. I'd always had a good intuition. As we were walking, suddenly I felt my stomach flip-flop, and I froze in my path looking around nervously. I just felt like I was being watched. My friend heard my footfall cease, and looked back at me with, "What's the matter with you? What are you doing?" I shushed them, and gestured at them to stop with my hand. We all froze and looked around, but none of us saw anything, and eventually one of the girls broke the silence. "There's nothing here, come on, let's go." I couldn't shake the feeling though. Uneasily, I followed them, and walked ahead of them protectively, since it seemed like only I could sense that there was trouble. But then I stopped in my tracks. As we rounded a corner, I saw two grown men facing us, head on, along the path we were taking. They were carrying something. I only looked briefly, but it looked like one was carrying either a chainsaw or a normal saw, and the other had like a hammer or small metal bat. One was wearing a black t-shirt, and the other a blue long sleeve. I told my friends to run, and we turned around, sprinting down the path we'd just taken, boots splattering the mud on our pants. I looked back, still running, and they were still following us, but it seemed as if they didn't know the woods as well as we did. I said, "Quick, run to the other neighborhood!" And we kept going, weaving through the trees and bushes and thorns. It was like a cliché movie scene, as one of my friends fell and we frantically scared, hopped her up and kept running. Eventually, we could see the trees thinning as we neared the other cul-de-sac, and we ran through, our feet finally hitting pavement. We didn't stop though, we kept booking it through the neighborhood. Eventually, when we got far enough away, we turned around and looked at the entrance of the woods, and the two men were standing there. They hadn't entered the neighborhood, likely because it was more public than the woods, but we could see the blue shirt from where he stood. The neighborhood we were now in was about a 10-minute drive from my house, on a main road, which is why we like taking the woods since there aren't any sidewalks. However, being 9 years old and fearing they'd follow us anyway from the woods, we got onto the main road and called my mom. Eventually she came to get us. We were all shocked and crying a little, and my mom called the cops. They searched the area but found zero signs of any of them. The thing is, there's never anyone in the woods. Maybe there were construction workers, but there wasn't any construction going on with the mud, and it wasn't even nearly ready to go into a building process. They'd only started clearing the woods. Also, they were carrying things that could be used as weapons. The only freaky thing that proves that they had bad intentions were the fact that they chased us 3 9-year-old girls through the woods with weapons. And I had that gut feeling. Thank God my mom made me bring my cell phone on our walk. Also, we'd later gone through my cameras of the pictures we had taken, and in the photo with the high vantage point, you could see a black boot, 1 leg, and a blue long-sleeved arm from behind a tree when you zoomed into a spot in the background. No face was visible though, but they'd been watching us for a while that day. We were lucky to have known the area, but dear 2 men who chased us through the forest, let's not meet. The Smoker in the Woods. This story happened 2 years ago, while I was in university working on my degree in biology. I had signed up for a trip to gather samples from an experiment some students in the ecology department were going to run. It required the collection of samples from several sites, so they recruited biology, ecology, and forestry majors to help them complete the samplings in a short period of time. The area my group was to take samples from was a few hours from my university in the Pacific Northwest. There are 9 of us in my group, 8 students and a supervising professor. We got to the campsite in the late evening and set up our tents. One of the other students had brought a big container of split pea soup from home and was sharing it with the others on the trip. I don't really care for split pea soup, so I declined the offer. Everyone had some except me, one other student, and the professor. Come the next morning, the 5 students who had eaten the soup weren't in the best of shape. They were in the grips of some gnarly food poisoning and were in no shape to hike for 8 or 9 hours to collect the samples we needed. The professor who was supervising us had originally some rules, such as people travel in groups, or at least 2, and we had to return to camp by nightfall. Now those rules were tossed out to make sure we kept our timetable and collected all of the required samplings. We were just told to do your best to complete the work assigned as long as you can do it safely. That morning, I set out for a long day of hiking. After a mile or so, I ran into the stream I was supposed to follow. I needed to travel about 4 miles upstream, stopping every quarter mile to collect samples of the water and soil. This meant I had to hustle to get back before dark. Halfway through the day, I realized that wasn't going to happen. About 2 miles into my hike, I stopped for lunch, sitting on a log overlooking the stream. The scene was really peaceful, until I smelled the cigarettes. It wasn't the smell of a cigarette being smoked, more the musty smell of a heavy smoker's car, where cigarette butts had been left to ferment for weeks on end. I looked around but couldn't see anyone. I just assumed that the wind had blown the scent of some hunter or hiker over to me. But minutes later, the smell hadn't faded. The vegetation in the area wasn't that thick, but there was still a lot of places for someone to duck behind a tree or bush. I was unnerved that someone was apparently staying close enough for me to smell them for this long, without so much as a word. I quickly packed up the trash from my lunch and continued up the stream. The musty cigarette smell went away for the next few hours. It wasn't until I arrived at my last sample location, late into dusk, that I smelt it again. The woods were getting really dim by this point. Looking back on it now, it was a really stupid idea to stay out so late, as just hiking back to the camp in the dark would be pretty dangerous, even without a cigarette smoker stalker. Having just put the collection tubes in my bag, I shined my flashlight around the darkening woods, looking for whoever was giving off the smell. I didn't see anything that really caught my attention at that moment. It would actually be more correct to say I saw too many things in the dim light. That might have been a head sticking out from behind a tree or someone crouched low in the foliage. I didn't like the idea of being in the dark woods with a stranger who for the second time was lurking near me without revealing themselves. So I began to double time it back down the stream. I made much better time on my way back, even though it was dark, because I didn't have to stop to take any samples. Even so, I didn't get back to my camp till a bit before 10. I was the last one to get back, and everyone but the professor was already asleep. I didn't mention the cigarette smell to the professor because he seemed tired as it was, and he headed to his bed in the RV soon after I got back. I headed to my tent soon after too. At some point in the night, I woke up needing to pee. I decided to head into the woods to do my business, as I knew some of the other students were still feeling ill and needed the RV toilet for more urgent matters than just having to take a leak. I walked about 100 feet into the woods, found a tree, and did what I needed to. As I turned to go back to camp, something caught my eye. Somewhere off in the woods, there was a tiny red glow. I was confused as to what it was until it flared momentarily, and I realized it was a sherry of a cigarette. I stood there for a while watching the red ember glow fade, then move slightly closer to the ground, as whoever was smoking would take it out of their mouth. Not being able to see the person, I assumed they were watching the camp. I didn't know if they had seen me make my way into the woods or not, as the fire had been doused and the moon was only half full, so there wasn't very much light. I made my way slowly back to camp as quietly as I could and entered the RV to wake the professor up. I told him about the person smoking in the woods and about the smell of cigarettes earlier that day. However, when we got outside the RV, the ember from that cigarette was gone. My professor woke the other student who hadn't come down with food poisoning, and we took turns watching over camp. I didn't see or smell anything else until when I was on guard duty and went to sleep when the professor woke up for his turn. In the morning, the professor, the other student, and I went to where I guessed the smoker had been standing the night before, and sure enough, we found about 10 cigarette butts on the ground next to a tree. The tree itself looked like someone had been twisting and stabbing a knife or other sharp object into it, as the bark and outer layers of wood had been damaged and chipped away. The professor decided that the group should head back that day, even though we hadn't collected all the samples we were assigned to collect, just to be on the safe side. We packed up camp and drove down the thin dirt trail without incident. The second we got onto the paved highway, though, a white paneled van pulled out of a clearing just off the shoulder and began following us. This van stayed behind us all the way back, pulling off the highway when we did, taking the same surface streets that we did, and only stopped following us when we turned onto the road leading to our university campus. Everyone was freaked out by this, but it was around 9 at night on a weekend, so the security office on campus was closed. We decided to unload the RV and call it a night, as the van hadn't followed us onto the campus either. I offered to help the professor catalog and store the collection tubes from our trip, so it was another couple hours before I left the biological sciences building and started heading towards the dorm building I lived in. I stepped out into the cool night air and began walking. My professor had left the building in the other direction to get to his car and drive home. It was a couple dozen feet outside of the building, which was now locked, when I was hit with a musty smell of old cigarettes. I looked around, and about 25 yards away in the darkness, off of the footpath, I saw the cherry of a cigarette smoldering away. I was pretty scared at this point, but hoped it was only a student or some faculty staying late, having a smoke. I couldn't completely convince myself of this, as the musty cigarette smell was the same as what I smelled in the woods the previous night. I started down the footpath and soon passed whoever was smoking. 100 feet or so later, I looked over my shoulder and saw the cigarette sherry bobbing in the darkness. The smoker was following me. This creeped me out a bit more, but I still held it together. That is until I rounded a small stand of trees and saw a white panel van parked alone in a parking lot. I took off at a sprint towards my dorm building. I looked over my shoulder a few steps into my run. I saw the sherry of the cigarette fall to the ground, and a dark shape beginning to move after me. I didn't look back again, but I could hear someone running in the grass off of the footpath. I got to the entrance to my dorm building and frantically waved my keycard in front of the card reader that controlled the door lock. As soon as I heard the soft beep, I opened the door. I jumped through the doorway to shut the door quickly. I stopped and peered through the glass door. I saw the dark shape stop, just short of the lit pathway. I just watched for a minute or two. Then I saw the spark of a lighter. The light is just barely bright enough to illuminate a shaggy beard and brim of a baseball cap before it disappears and was replaced with the red glow of a cigarette. I turned and headed up the stairs to my dorm room. By the time I get to the window overlooking the same yard I just run through, there is no trace of a dark figure or a cigarette cherry. After that, I didn't see that white-paneled van again, or smell that musty cigarette smell, and I hope I never do. Freak in the Woods. Thought I would tell people a little background of information on myself. I'm an avid mountain walker and spend most weekends trekking the mountains and hills of South Wales. I've done this for over 15 years now. Within that time, only twice have I ever felt genuinely concerned for my safety. Once when I was confronted by a bull, and the other in the story below. It was a boiling hot Saturday afternoon, about 5 years ago. I was doing one of my favorite walks, which was about 14 miles long. This particular area was mainly forestry, but the tracks themselves were gravel. There were no other walkers, and only a few cyclists, which is kind of a typical thing being it's so hot outside. So the first 9 to 10 miles were standard. I was at the bottom of a track that would eventually lead to the top of the valley. About 50 meters ahead, I could see a man walking in the same direction. He was tall, thin, and had short cropped hair. He was wearing a white t-shirt, blue jeans, and black boots, and he walked with a strange limp that looked like he had to swing his leg around, almost like one leg was shorter than the other. I didn't think much of it. He was actually walking quite fast, so probably wouldn't have to overtake him. I carried on up the track. The sun was overhead, and it was sweltering. The man in front kept limping along, but nonetheless was making quick work of the incline. The track started to bend, and I lost sight of the limping man. The track comes up to a choice of two paths, east that leads to a small car park, and the west which leads to the top of the valley. As I was about to head west, I heard a man shout, "Fuck!" It was coming from within the forest. I waited a second, and another outburst, "No!" My first thought was, that guy must have tried to take a shortcut and fallen over. As I made my way through the thick trees and ferns to see what was up, I stopped, dead in my tracks. Up ahead through the trees, I could see the man. He was sitting down on a log with his head in his hands. He then screamed at the top of his lungs, "Ah!" He then bolted up and started punching a tree. His face was bright red. He was raging. He then picked up a stick and started to bash it against the tree. I was frozen. I couldn't actually process what the hell was going on. He just looked absolutely mad. He shouted, "I hate you!" and started stomping his feet. I simply thought, I need to get out of here before he sees me. I quietly started to make my way back to the track, careful not to fall over or make any loud noises. The man was clearly a lunatic. I thought I would go the more rarely used east track and then take a shortcut north through the ferns. This was probably the best way to avoid him. With every step, I became more confident and almost started to laugh about it. Maybe just wanted to let off a bit of steam and vent some anger. The middle of the forest seems like the perfect place, I suppose. After about 10 to 15 minutes, the ferns started to grow thick, and they were at chest level. It wasn't a problem because they were fairly easy to push through. As I looked back behind me, I could see the limping man about 25 meters away. He is wading through the ferns towards me. He had a strange snarl on his face, and his head is bobbing up and down between the ferns. I couldn't believe what was happening. He must have seen me. There was no other explanation. I was only a mile away from a main road. So I started to speed up and walked a bit faster. I occasionally looked behind me and could see I was getting further and further away. I started to relax. It's over. I still don't know what to make of the situation, but the fact he followed me through the ferns was the most disturbing thing. I have done that same walk over a dozen times since, and haven't seen him again. Flute player in the woods. So, this happened years ago, but I remembered it and thought you guys might find it kind of interesting. A little background. I'm a 17-year-old girl. My family, aunts, uncles, cousins, etc., all share this cottage in a nearby campground. We've had it in the family since my mom was a teenager, so since I was little, I've been going out there. Since we've been going there for so long, we know the community fairly well. A lot of strong bonds have formed with the neighbors and nearby campers. Basically, everybody knows everybody. This one particular incident, my friend and I, who were about 10 years old at the time, were out for a hike. We only ever hung out when we were at the lake, so we often went hiking along the same trail to kill time, which passed by a forest in the heart of the community. As we strolled around the area, we heard a light tune coming from the forest to our left. Our heads snapped in direction of the sound, and it came to a stop. We shrugged it off as we were 10. We didn't get freaked out too easily. We continued walking as the path turned, and our backs were now to where the sound was initially heard. Once again, the light tune started up, and once again, we turned towards the sound. It came to a halt. Now, I don't know why we continued walking away at this point, but we did. The forest was now a ways behind us. When it started up again, this time, I turned towards a mysterious song and started walking. The flute didn't stop playing, but instead got faster. I slowed my steps and I realized the speed of the song, and it stopped once again. The second we started walking away, the flutist bounced back into action, and I started running towards the tree line. The song ended when I was a few meters away, and the silence that followed was deafening. The girl I was with took off running towards the main road, and I followed. Now, it could have been nothing, but for some reason we didn't tell anyone about what happened. Nothing like that has ever happened again, but freaks me out, even now, thinking about it. Someone who we knew was messing with us that day. A person in our small, tight-knit community was standing right behind the tree line watching us. Why? Who knows? I guess we'll never know what would have happened if we crossed the tree line that day. So, random flute player, let's not meet.